The ancient stones remember, and they never forget who enters. The city that dreams. Dr. Alina Reyes had studied Incan archaeology for 15 years earlier. Then she changed into granted permission to stay in a single day at Machu Picchu. It turned into an extraordinary possibility. Maximum researchers got a few hours after the travelers left, but Alina's suggestion to observe nocturnal acoustic phenomena inside the Temple of the Solar had inspired the right human beings. She might have 3 nights alone in the historical castle, from sunset to sunrise, with handiest a protection guard stationed at the doorway gate. "You are sure approximately this?" her colleague Paulo requested as they hiked up the mountain on a gray October afternoon. "There are stories, Alina. The locals may not even talk approximately what takes place here after dark." "Tales don't problem me. Facts does." Alina adjusted her recording device. "The Incas have been master acousticians. The manner they located these structures, the angles of the walls, they have been designed to channel sound in precise approaches. I want to record how the environment modifications at night." Paulo helped her installation in the Temple of the Solar, a curved structure with windows aligned to solstice positions. The stonework changed into flawless, every block becoming together so exactly that no longer even a blade should slip among them. Because the last visitor businesses descended and the Solar began its fall in the back of the mountains, Paulo squeezed her shoulder. "My phone won't paintings up here, however I will be lower back at sunrise. Promise me you will stay within the temple. Do not wander." "I'm no longer infant, Paulo." "Number, however, you're in an area older than you recognize." He left before she may want to reply. The Shield, a taciturn guy named Mateo, locked the gate at 6 p.m. Alina become by myself with the ruins, the mist, and the gathering darkness. She spent the first 2 hours setting up her gadget, microphones at diverse factors, motion sensors, cameras with nighttime vision capability. She wanted to capture how sound moved through the ancient city, how the wind interacted with stone, whether there has been any reality to the legends of voices heard at night. By way of 8 p.m., the recordings had begun. Alina sat in the temple, monitoring her laptop, looking waveforms spike and fall as wind moved through the ruins. Everything became ordinary, till it wasn't. At 8:47 p.m., each microphone picked up the identical sound concurrently. A low hum, simply below the brink of human hearing, however seen on her spectrograms as a really perfect sine wave. It lasted exactly 43 seconds, then stopped. Alina's pores and skin prickled. That wasn't wind. That became something else. She checked her equipment, the whole lot become functioning usually. She waited, watching the displays, and at 9:04 p.m. it happened again. The same hum, the identical frequency, the identical duration. And this time she felt it, a vibration in her chest, as though the mountain itself become respiratory. Alina grabbed her flashlight and stepped outdoor the temple. The ruins stretched before her, bathed in moonlight and shadow. The terraces cascaded down the mountainside like frozen waves. The whole lot turned into still, silent. Then the stones began to sing. It began softly, a whisper of sound that appeared to return from the partitions themselves. No longer one voice, however many, layered and harmonizing, talking in Quechua. Alina's hold close of the language become restricted, but she identified positive phrases. Wakeful, consider, dream. Her clinical mind insisted on rational factors. Wind through cracks within the stone, acoustic resonance, temperature changes causing the rocks to settle. However, the one's motives felt whole because the making a song grew louder, extra complicated, greater intentional. Alina back to her equipment. The microphones were taking pictures the entirety, but the waveforms seemed incorrect. They pulsed in styles that have been too everyday, too organized, nearly like language, almost like concept. At 10 p.m., the singing stopped. Inside the unexpected silence, Alina heard footsteps. They were coming from the course of the Intihuatana, the ritual stone on the metropolis's maximum factor. Slow, measured footsteps on historical stone. Elena's heart hammered. Mateo turned into speculated to be on the gate. No one else ought to be right here. "Hey," she referred to as out. "Mateo." The footsteps persevered, developing closer. Elena grabbed her flashlight and pointed it in the direction of the sound. The beam cut through darkness and mist, illuminating empty pathways and stone walls. Nobody there. However, the footsteps didn't forestall. They had been beside her now, circling the temple. She could listen them surely, the wonderful sound of toes on stone, accompanied by way of the rustle of fabric. Elena's hand trembled as she panned her light across the temple. Empty, absolutely empty. The footsteps entered the temple, surpassed within inches of where she stood, and endured to the away's wall. There, they stopped. Elena aimed her flashlight at the spot and noticed something that made her blood freeze. A shadow stood against the wall, a human silhouette solid through not anything. There has been no frame, no person, just the shadow itself, as though light changed into bending around an invisible presence. "You can check Muskwakaiku," a voice whispered. "We are dreaming." The shadow moved along the wall, its edges rippling. Elena subsidized away, her medical worldview cracking like skinny ice. This wasn't acoustics. This wasn't resonance. "You can check Nyakarikuchkeku," the voice persevered. "We are awakening." More shadows seemed, dozens of them, spreading throughout the temple partitions like stains. Each one forged through nothing, each one shifting independently. They surrounded Elena, and she found out with growing horror that they have been displaying her something, memories embedded inside the stone itself. The shadows fashioned shapes, people working, building, praying. She saw the metropolis because it were, alive with Incas appearing rituals, making offerings, conducting ceremonies she did not understand. But there was something else too, something the shadows had been scared of, something that made even these remnants of the lifeless flinch. Within the middle of her vision, a new picture formed, the Intihuatana stone, and accumulated around it, priests appearing a ritual. They had been binding something, sealing something into the stone itself. Their faces had been masks of terror and backbone. The vision ended, the shadows vanished. Elena stood alone in the temple, gasping, her equipment beeping, pressing warnings. Every sensor had maxed out. Each microphone had recorded sound beyond their capacity to measure. She checked her watch, 11:11 p.m. She had been status there for over an hour, although it had felt like seconds. Elena knew she must go away, need to discover Mateo and call for to be let loose. But she couldn't. Her scientific interest warred with her worry, and curiosity won. She needed to recognize what changed into going on, what the shadows had tried to expose her. She gathered her primary recording system and headed closer to the Intihuatana. The direction was treacherous in darkness, even with her flashlight. Mist rolled via the ruins like something alive, parting before her and last behind. The making a song had again, louder now, more pressing. It seemed to be coming from the stone itself, from deep within the mountain. Elena climbed the stairs to the Intihuatana platform. The ritual stone stood within the middle, a carved pillar pointing in the direction of the heavens. The Incas had known as it the hitching submit of the sun, believing it held celestial forces in vicinity. In daylight hours, it turned into an outstanding example of astronomical engineering. In darkness, it turned into something else completely. The stone changed into sparkling. Not brightly, only a faint luminescence like foxfire or phosphorescent algae. Elena approached slowly, her flashlight seeming inadequate. As she drew near, she felt the vibration once more potent now, resonating in her bones. She positioned her hand at the stone. It turned into heat. The sector exploded into vision. Elena turned into no longer in her very own frame. She changed into seeing through different eyes, experiencing other reminiscences. She became a priest, centuries in the past, taking part within the ritual the shadows had shown her. She felt the fear of what they were trying to include, an entity that had existed lengthy earlier than the Incas, something ancient and patient that had been snoozing in the mountain. The Spanish have been coming. The town could be abandoned. If they left, the seals might weaken, and the issue inside the mountain would wake. So that they done one final ritual, the most terrible sacrifice. They wove their awareness into the stones themselves, becoming guardians even in death, dreaming an eternal vigil to preserve the entity certain. "We sleep so it sleeps," the reminiscence whispered. "We dream so it can't wake. However, dreams fade and stone erodes and the bindings weaken with time." Alina pulled her hand away, gasping. She understood now. Machu Picchu wasn't deserted because of the Spanish. It changed into evacuated. The human beings left because staying supposed being consumed by way of the very ritual meant to defend the sector from what slept underneath. And now, after 5 centuries, the desires were failing. She heard it then, a ballad from underneath, from deep in the mountain. Now not making a song, not buzzing, something else. A presence stirring, trying out the boundaries of its jail, finding them weak. The stones beneath her feet started out to vibrate. Hairline cracks seamed in the Intihuatana, spreading like lightning throughout its surface. The glow intensified, pulsing like a heartbeat. Alina ran. She fled down the stairs, her device forgotten, her clinical detachment shattered. Behind her, the making a song of the stones have become screaming, the dying cry of guardians who had held vigil for half of a millennium and have been finally failing. She changed into halfway throughout the main plaza when the earth shook. Not an earthquake. Something changed into rising, pushing up from below, checking out the weight of stone and soil above it. The terraces commenced to collapse, historical stonework crumbling as whatever lay beneath flexed against its bonds. Alina heard a sound that no human throat could make, a voice older than language, expressing starvation and rage and terrible, alien awareness. She reached the entrance gate and pounded on it. "Mateo, open the gate, open it now." No response. She seemed via the bars and saw him, standing motionless, staring up at the ruins with clean eyes. He was dreaming, she realized. Caught in the equal visions that had trapped the clergymen, his thoughts pulled into the stone's fatting desires. Every other tremor. The temple of the solar collapsed in the back of her, ideal stones tumbling like children's blocks. From the rubble, something emerged, or attempted to. Alina couldn't observe it without delay. Her eyes slid away, unable to method what they have been seeing. It became form without shape, presence without substance, recognition older than humanity seeking to force itself into a world that had lengthy on account that moved on without it. The shadow monks materialized across the plaza, loads of them, their bureaucracy more stable now. They surrounded the emerging entity, and Alina understood. They have been the usage of the final of their energy, the very last remnants in their eternal dream, to push it returned. "Run," they whispered, their voices echoing from every stone. "We cannot keep an awful lot longer. The metropolis desires its ultimate dream. Whilst we fade, it wakes." Alina grabbed Mateo and slapped him hard. His eyes focused, and he or she noticed cognizance return, observed by means of natural terror. "The keys," she demanded. "Now." His palms shook as he unlocked the gate. They stumbled through, walking down the mountain course in darkness, falling and scraping themselves on rocks, pushed by means of primal fear. In the back of them, the ruins lit up with not possible mild. The making a song reached a crescendo, then reduce off abruptly. In the unexpected silence, Alina heard the entity's voice without a doubt for the primary time, a sound that existed in her mind instead of her ears, talking in principles in preference to phrases. It became conscious. The prison changed into broken. The dreams had ended. They made it to the base station as sunrise broke. Paulo became already there, alerted by using the seismic monitors. What befell? The readings. "Evacuate," Alina interrupted. "Evacuate each person within 50 miles, now. Elena, you are now not making sense. The metropolis is wide awake. The element below it is unfastened. We need to go away, everyone. However, whilst she spoke, she knew it changed into too late. She may want to experience it, a presence increasing outward from the mountain, a recognition that we're certain for hundreds of years now stretching, exploring, touching the minds of each reciting aspect in its range. People started out to acquire outdoor the station, dozens of them, employees and guards and early morning vacationers. They stood immobile, staring up at Machu Picchu, their faces slack, dreaming even as conscious. Elena watched in horror as the entity claimed them, pulling their awareness into itself, feeding on minds after centuries of starvation. It wasn't evil, she found out. It was simply hungry, alien, running on good judgment that predated humanity. The Incas had understood that they had given themselves to the stone, woven their dreams into a prison, sacrificed their afterlife to keep this factor contained. For 500 years, their fatting awareness had held. But now the desires were long past. The guardians had expended themselves, and the entity become free to dream its own dreams, nightmares that might reshape reality around itself, pulling the arena into its historic alien sleep. Elena felt it touching her mind, mild but insistent, inviting her to dream with it. She fought in opposition to the pull, however her resistance turned into weakening. The entity have been by myself for so long, trapped and starving. It desired enterprise. It desired to proportion its desires. She idea of the shadow monks, of their everlasting sacrifice. She notion of the selection that they had made, to bind themselves to stone, to give up the entirety, to dream all the time in provider of retaining this thing contained. The entity's contact grew more potent, Elena's imaginative and prescient blurred. She became at the edge of awareness, approximately to slip into desires from which there was no waking. Along with her last moment of readability, she made a desire. They determined Elena 3 days later, sitting at the base of the mountain, staring up at the ruins. She failed to respond to her name. She slightly breathed. Her eyes have been open but unseeing, her thoughts elsewhere. The phenomenon unfolds slowly at the start, then faster. Inside every week, all and sundry who got here within reach of Machu Picchu fell into the identical nation, conscious but dreaming, their attention pulled into something large and ancient. The Peruvian authorities mounted a quarantine zone. UNESCO declared it a catastrophic archaeological emergency. However, the reality changed into recognized only to a few. The entity was feeding, growing more potent, and the quarter become increasing. Each night, its goals reached a little further. Every morning, extra humans stood motionless, looking toward the mountain, their minds now not their very own. Elena remains at the bottom of the mountain, one in every of hundreds now, standing in silent vigil. If you may see into her mind, you discover her jogging through corridors of stone, chasing shadows that used to be priests, seeking to learn their rituals, their binding spells, their sacrifice. She's looking to rebuild the prison from the inside, to emerge as a new parent, to dream a brand new dream that would incorporate what have to by no means have woken. However, dreams are fragile things, and the entity that desires under Machu Picchu has been dreaming a ways longer than humanity has existed. The vacationers prevent coming, the researchers depart. The government builds walls and posts guards, but the dreaming spreads. It's affected person. It has all the time within the global. At night, in case you stand at the edge of the quarantine region, you can hear singing. Not the wind, now not acoustics. However, the sound of minds united in eternal dreaming, attempting desperately to weave a prison from their own focus. They may be failing. The city goes on, and its dreams are ingesting the arena, one sound asleep thoughts at a time. And someplace inside the depths of these goals, Elena runs through limitless corridors of stone, searching for a binding as a way to maintain, a ritual with a purpose to paintings, a sacrifice with a purpose to be sufficient. she's nonetheless searching. She'll seek forever. That's what it approached to be a dad or mum, to dream the everlasting dream, to preserve again the darkness, to offer everything in service of a seal that grows weaker with each passing moment. The Incas knew this. They understood the value. Now Alina knows too. And soon, perhaps, we all will. While the goals attain us. While the city calls. Whilst we, too, end up guardians of a prison we will by no means depart, dreaming goals we will by no means wake from, retaining returned something that must in no way had been disturbed. Machu Picchu nonetheless stands on its mountain, more beautiful than ever, extra mysterious, more deadly. It dreams, and its goals are hungry. The ascending course. Jessica Torres had hiked the Inca Trail 3 times earlier then, however this became her first time main a set solo. 8 travelers, various fitness stages, 4 days to attain Machu Picchu. It must have been recurring. She'd completed this journey, so usually she ought to navigate it blindfolded. The group turned into usual, German couples of their 50s, a couple of American college students on their whole and solo vacationers, a British photographer named Simon, and a quiet Japanese lady named Keiko who spoke little but smiled often. They had began from kilometer 82 that morning, spirits high despite the tough elevation. Through the second day, Jessica observed something atypical. The path markers were incorrect. She'd memorized every twist of the route, each rest stop, each checkpoint. However, the stone markers, historic Incan path signs that had stood for centuries, had been in exceptional positions. Or instead, there were extra of them. Extras. Markers that she'd by no means visible earlier than, pointing closer to paths that should not exist. Jessica, Simon approached as they took a water break. Is it simply me, or does the path experience longer than the brochure stated? Mountain trails constantly experience longer while you're walking them, she spoke back, but doubt gnawed at her. She checked her GPS. The coordinates have been right. They were precisely where they need to be. But something felt off, like trying to recollect a dream that saved slipping away. That night time, they camped at Paquimeo. Jessica counted her organization earlier than bed, 8 vacationers, herself, and 2 porters. 11 humans total. But while she did a head count within the dying firelight, she counted 12. She counted once more. 12. Who's that? She asked, pointing to a figure sitting just beyond the fireplace's glow. Absolutely everyone seemed. The determined stood and walked into the darkness before everybody ought to see actually. Likely one of the porters from any other organization, one of the Germans advised, but Jessica knew higher. The closest different organization changed into camped an hour in advance, and the parent have been wearing conventional Incan clothing, the type you saw in museums, no longer present-day trekking tools. She did not sleep well that night time. On every occasion she closed her eyes, she felt like she'd become being watched. Whilst she did drift off, she dreamed of paths, limitless stone steps ascending into mist, going up and up and up, never reaching their destination. The third day became when things started to unravel. They broke camp at sunrise and continued the ascent in the direction of Dead Lady's Skip, the very best point at the path. The climb turned into brutal, however Jessica had done it earlier then. What she hadn't skilled had been the voices. They started out as whispers, carried on the wind, speak me in Quechua. Jessica spoke enough to apprehend fragments. Climb higher, the route awaits. Ascend to where the gods sleep. Does anybody else hear that? Keiko asked, her typically serene face troubled. Numerous others nodded. The whispers had been developing louder, more insistent, seeming to come back from the stones themselves. When they reached Dead Girl's Skip, Jessica's blood ran cold. There was some other trail. She'd crossed this skip a dozen instances. There has been one way up, one way down. However, now, slightly visible within the mist, stone steps persisted upward, a third route, ascending past the bypass, leading somewhere better. "This is now not on the map," Simon stated, already elevating his digital camera. "Because it doesn't exist," Jessica replied. But whilst she spoke, she remembered something, a tale her grandmother had advised her, a legend approximately a mystery path known most effective to the very best monks, a path that caused a temple above the clouds wherein the Incas made their most sacred sacrifices. "We're no longer taking it," Jessica announced firmly. "We observe the marked trail down." However, when she turned around, one of the American students turned into missing. "Where's Tyler?" His buddy Jake appeared around frantically. "He was right at the back of me." They searched for 20 minutes, calling his name. However, Tyler had vanished. No tracks, no signs of struggle, nothing. It changed into as if he'd surely stepped out of existence. "He must have gone down beforehand," Jessica said, trying to hold panic from her voice. "We're going to capture as much as him." However, she knew that wasn't real. She'd seen Tyler's backpack lying at the ground close to the ascending route, cautiously placed, as though he'd set it down intentionally earlier than persevering with upward. That they had no desire but to keep. Jessica radioed for help, but her radio produced most effective static. Her phone had no signal, ordinary for the mountains, but her GPS wasn't operating either. The tool confirmed their vicinity as a clean area, as if they existed nowhere in any respect. The descent must have taken 3 hours. They walked for 6, and the ruins of Winyehuena, their deliberate campsite, by no means regarded. As an alternative, the direction-stored twisting returned on itself, made them in circles, or no longer circles, spirals. They had been ascending once more, though they'd been taking walks downhill. "This is impossible," one of the Germans stated, his voice tight with fear. "We are going up. We've been going up for an hour." Jessica checked her altimeter. He became proper. Regardless of on foot what felt like a descent, that they had received 500 feet of elevation. The mist grew thicker. Visibility dropped to a few meters. After which, emerging from the fog like a ghost, they noticed it, a break that wasn't on any map. It became smaller than Machu Picchu, however built inside the same fashion. Deal stonework, trapezoidal doorways, an important plaza with a carved stone altar. But this place turned into incorrect. The proportions were off, the angles too sharp, the shadows too deep. And it felt old, now not 500 years vintage, however ancient beyond measure, as though the Incas had built over something some distance older. "We have to pass in," Keiko said. Her voice was distant, dreamy. "We ought to see what's interior." "No," Jessica grabbed her arm. "We are leaving now." However, when she became around, the direction become gone. Where they had entered the plaza become now a solid stone wall, weathered and ancient, as though no opening had ever existed. They had been trapped. As night time fell, Jessica attempted to maintain the organization calm, however panic changed into placing in. Jake turned into crying for Tyler. The Germans argued approximately whether or not to try mountain climbing over the walls. Simon photographed everything obsessively, as though documenting their scenario could by some means make it much less actual. Most effective Keiko appeared at peace. She sat in the middle of the plaza, her eyes closed, buzzing a melody that made Jessica's skin crawl. It sounded Incan, however incorrect, like a tune performed backward or a prayer spoken in opposite. "Keiko, prevent that," Jessica snapped. Keiko opened her eyes. They were completely black, not the pupils but the entire eye like pools of ink. "Cannot you hear them? They're singing. They have been making a song for so long, expecting someone to answer." She stood and walked closer to the altar. Earlier than Jessica may want to stop her, she placed her palms at the carved stone. The ruins came alive. Mild blazed from the stones, no longer torchlight or sunlight, but something else, something that harmed to look at. The partitions began to shift, reconfiguring themselves, doors acting where there'd been none. and from those doors came figures. They seemed human at the beginning glance, humans in conventional Incan get-dressed, their faces painted for right. But they moved wrong, their joints bending at not possible angles, their heads tilting two ways. And their eyes had been similar to Keiko's. Black, empty, hungry. "The path demands charge," one of them said in perfect English, even though its mouth failed to pass efficiently. "You have walked the ascending path. You have to entire the adventure." "What adventure?" Jessica demanded, positioning herself between the figures and her organization. "What do you need?" "To ascend, to climb, to reach the location in which Earth touches sky and the gods acquire their services. The direction is historic. The course is sacred. The course need to be fed." One of the figures pointed on the altar. Jessica noticed now what she'd overlooked earlier than channels carved into the stone, dark with historical stains. This was a sacrificial altar, and the direction hadn't led them here via accident. "The Spanish got here," the discern endured. "They destroyed the temples, killed the monks, burned the sacred texts, but they could not locate this vicinity. This area exists between the world this is and the arena that changed into. And the route stays, usually ascending, constantly hungry, continually calling folks that wander too close." "Let us pass," Jessica said. "Please, we didn't mean to return right here." No person approached to find the ascending path. However, after you start hiking, you cannot stop. Up and up and up, till you attain the highest location in which the best sacrifices are made. The parent's head tilted at a sickening perspective. "Your pal understood. He climbs still. Could you want to peer?" Before Jessica could answer, the scene shifted. She changed into now not within the plaza, however, standing on a mountainside impossibly excessive. So high the air become thin, and the sky turned into black despite the sun shining. Tyler turned into there, nonetheless hiking, his palms bloody, his face blank with exhaustion. He became ascending stairs that led nowhere, an endless staircase carved into the mountain, climbing toward something considerable and horrible that waited above. "He'll climb all the time," the figure whispered in her ear. "Except you are taking his vicinity." Jessica snapped return to the plaza. Her group stared at her, faded and terrified. Keiko nonetheless stood at the altar, her black eyes streaming tears. "I'm sorry," Keiko whispered. "I heard them calling for years, in desires, in images, in every picture of these mountains. They promised me peace if I delivered them offerings. They promised the mountain climbing might forestall." "You delivered us here intentionally," Jessica breathed. "You knew." "I'm so worn out," Keiko said. "I've been mountaineering in my desires, seeing that I was an infant. Every night, up and up and up. They said if I brought them new climbers, I should subsequently rest." The figures moved closer. Jessica counted them. There had been dozens now, all with the one's terrible black eyes, all transferring with that inaccurate, angular gait. Former climbers, she realized. Those who'd observed the ascending route over centuries and were ate up by means of it. "Choose," the lead figure said. "Climb and join us, or go away and doom your pal to eternal ascent. But understand this, in case you leave, the direction will observe you. It will seem to your dreams on your mind in every mountain you see. You will listen the calling all the time. And finally, you may return, bringing others with you, simply as she did." Jessica looked at her institution, worried, confused those who depended on her to guide them correctly. She notion of Tyler, hiking ad infinitum. She concept of Keiko, enslaved via nightmares for years. She made her decision. "Take me," she said. "Let them cross, they all, which includes Tyler. I'll climb your route. I will ascend to whatever location you are guarding, but you allow them to go away with their minds intact." The figures conferred in whispers that gave the impression of wind over stone. Subsequently, the chief nodded. "The direction accepts this change, the sturdy for the various. But recognize this, Manuel, the vicinity you climb toward is not demise. It is something else. Something the Incas feared so significantly they constructed an everlasting course to it, hopping no person would ever reach the top. "I don't care," Jessica said. "Allow them to go." The parent gestured. The partitions shifted again, and there, exceptionally changed into the path, the actual trail, main down in the direction of Machu Picchu. Tyler stood at its head, alive and harassed but entire. "Cross," Jessica commanded. "Don't appearance returned. Don't talk approximately what befell here, just move." They ran, all besides Keiko, who stood at the altar, tears streaming. "You too," Jessica said gently. "You've suffered sufficient." "Thanks," Keiko whispered. Then she collapsed, launched at final from whatever goodbye she'd made. Simon, the photographer, grabbed Keiko and carried her closer to the trail. At the brink, he grew to become lower back. "Jessica." "Move." They went. Jessica watched until they disappeared into the mist, praying they had make it down effectively, that they had forget about this place, that the course could launch them. Then she turned to the figures. "I'm equipped." They led her to the lower back of the plaza, in which stairs seemed, stone steps ascending into mist and darkness, going up at an impossible perspective. Jessica started to climb. She climbed for hours, days, weeks, time lost that means at the ascending route. The air grew skinny, then thick, then became to something that wasn't air at all. The stairs in no way ended. They went up via clouds, through rock, through areas that existed among life. She saw others at the route, historical climbers. Incan clergymen who'd made this adventure voluntarily, Spanish conquistadors who'd stumbled here seeking gold, modern-day hikers who'd gotten misplaced. All mountain climbing, mountain climbing towards something at the pinnacle. Jessica's legs burned, her lungs ached, but she couldn't prevent. The direction would not permit her. She needed to hold ascending, had to attain something waited at the summit of this not possible mountain. And then, after an eternity, she noticed it. The top of the steps ended at a temple carved from a single large stone, its architecture predating humanity. And guarding its front becomes something considerable, something that would once had been called a god, but turned into more like an idea given form. The embodiment of countless ascent, of eternal striving, of the human compulsion to climb better, to reach further, to transcend limits. It were worshipped with the aid of the Incas, by way of cultures earlier than them, with the aid of every civilization that looked at mountains and felt the call to climb. And it demanded tribute, not death, but determination. Folks that climbed the ascending route have become part of its eternal congregation, for all time ascending, all the time striving, all the time attaining for something just beyond hold close. Jessica understood now. This was the rate of ambition, of the power to head better, and she or he had volunteered to pay it. She took the final step and felt herself start to change, felt her focus increasing to embody the route itself. She might climb for all time, yes, however she might additionally grow to be the guardian, the one who ensured that best those who truly understood the cost could reach this region. A ways below, in the international of mountains and mist, her group reached Machu Picchu adequately. They advised a stressed tale approximately getting lost, approximately their guide disappearing, approximately a break that couldn't exist. The authorities found Tyler wandering close to Dead Girl's bypass and not using a memory of how he'd gotten separated. Keiko recovered, but by no means observed what passed off. She by no means photographed mountains again. And on occasion, hikers at the Inca Path document seeing more markers, paths that should not exist, a female in Manuel's clothing beckoning them towards stairs that lead upward into mist. Maximum are clever sufficient to ignore her. But some are not. Some pay attention the calling, the whisper of the ascending path, the promise that in the event that they just climb a little higher, they'll reach something transcendent. Those ones observe. And they climb. And climb. And climb. Jessica watches them come, one after the other. She courses them upward, towards the temple at the summit of the sector. Some flip lower back. A few entire the adventure. They all apprehend in the end that the ascending course is both curse and blessing, an everlasting quest that gives meaning but needs the entirety. The Incas knew this. They constructed their empire at the principle of ascent, literally and metaphorically. And they knew that a few paths, as soon as began, can never be deserted. Machu Picchu sits under, lovely and mysterious, drawing millions of pilgrims who come to surprise at stones and terraces. They take their snapshots, sense the altitude, and descend appropriately. Maximum of them besides. However, the ascending path is usually there, hidden in mist and shadow, awaiting people who hear its call. And at its summit, guarding the area wherein earth touches something beyond sky, Jessica Torres climbs still, now not struggling, now not quite, but all the time achieving for something simply past her grasp. That's what it approached to be a manual. To lead others towards transcendence, even when transcendence manner in no way arriving. To climb, constantly climb, for all time ascending. The course demands it. And she answers. The stone recalls. The first component archaeologist David Morrison observed whilst he arrived at Machu Picchu was the silence. No longer the absence of sound. Vacationers chattered, cameras clicked, guides recited their practiced speeches. But beneath all of it, a deeper quiet, as if the ruins themselves were holding their breath. David was there to study the Temple of the Condor, particularly the herbal rock formation that the Incas had carved to resemble a condor's wings. His uniqueness turned into lithic evaluation, knowledge how historical peoples labored stone. He'd posted papers on Stonehenge, the Moai of Easter Island, and the pyramids of Giza. Machu Picchu was the crown jewel he'd been saving for his profession's height. His Peruvian liaison, a stern female named Carmen, led him through the ruins after last time. "You have 3 weeks," she stated. "The authorities has given you unique access, however there are situations. You work best in detailed regions, you put off nothing, and you recognize the Apashitas." The what? Stone cairns, prayer offerings. The locals nevertheless lead them to, even though this is officially just an archaeological website. She gave him a glance that advised she disagreed with the "just" part of that announcement. "Don't disturb them. Do not photograph them. And in case you see offerings of coca leaves or alcohol, depart them on my own." David nodded, although privately he conceived it was all superstition. Stone changed into stone, atoms organized in crystalline patterns, formed by using geological techniques and human equipment. The simplest factor stones remembered became pressure and time. He installation his device in a small chamber adjoining to the Temple of the Condor. Floor-penetrating radar, laser scanning gadget, microscopes for inspecting device marks. Everything he needed to apprehend how the Incas had accomplished such precision without metal equipment or the wheel. The primary week passed uneventfully. David documented device marks, measured angles, took microscopic samples of the stone's floor. The precision changed into amazing, joints so tight you could not slip paper between them, angles calculated with mathematical accuracy that should not have been viable without cutting-edge gadgets. But it became the small information that commenced to disturb him. Tool marks that failed to healthy any recognized method. Crystalline structures in the granite that have been altered at a molecular stage, as though the stone have been softened, molded like clay, then rehardened. It changed into impossible, however the proof become there beneath his microscope. On the 8th day, he found the handprint. It became on an interior wall of the Temple of the Condor, in a gap in which shadows fell thick even at midday. The print turned into pressed into stable granite, the arms sunk an inch deep into stone that were unyielding. No longer carved, pressed, as though the rock had been soft as dust while the hand touched it. David photographed it from every perspective, took measurements, analyzed the compression patterns. His arms shook as he labored. This couldn't be real. Stone failed to behave this manner. It failed to soften and harden on command. Except the Incas had recognized something approximately running stone that cutting-edge science had forgotten. That night, returned in his small room in Aguas Calientes, David dreamed of palms pressing into stone, of rock flowing like water, of complete towns being fashioned not with tools but with touch. He woke at 3 a.m. with the understanding that someone was in his room, watching him. The gap became empty, however he couldn't shake the feeling of presence. The following morning, he found offerings at his worksite. Sparkling coca leaves organized in a careful pattern, a small bottle of pisco poured out on the stone ground. Carmen's warning echoed in his thoughts, but his scientific interest received. He documented the offerings, then cleared them away to preserve his paintings. It's when the stones started to alternate. It started out subtly, shadows falling at wrong angles, his laser scanner producing impossible readings, poor distances, measurements that claimed stones had been in two locations simultaneously. David recalibrated his system time and again, however the anomalies persisted. Then got here the visions. He'd be inspecting a wall, and all at once he'd see through it, not along with his eyes but with a few different scents. He'd understand the stone's reminiscence, compressed into its crystalline shape like records on a hard force. He saw the Incas quarrying granite from remote mountains, noticed them making a song to the stones, noticed priests appearing rituals that made the rock pliable. And he noticed what came before. Machu Picchu hadn't been constructed on empty land. There have been something here first, something the Incas had built over, included, tried to incorporate. A miles older shape, made with the aid of human beings whose call had been forgotten millennia earlier than the Incas rose to strength. And people ancient developers had regarded the inner most secret of stone, that it became alive in its own way, conscious in a way human minds could not grasp, remembering the whole lot it had ever touched. David staggered out of the temple, his mind reeling. The solar turned into pudding, painting the ruins in blood-red light. Tourist businesses had lengthy due to the fact that departed. He turned into by myself with Carmen, who stood near the entrance, her face grave. "You sense it now," she said. It wasn't a query. "What's occurring to me?" The stone recollects. It continually recollects. And from time to time, when someone touches it the right manner, appears at it too deeply, it stalks those memories. She approached him slowly. "My grandmother became a curandera, a healer. She advised me testimonies approximately this region, about how the Incas selected it not despite what changed into here before, however due to it. They attempted to seal something, to construct over it, to comprise it with layer upon layer of perfectly equipped stone. Incorporate what?" Carmen's eyes have been dark with ancient understanding. "Focus. Focus. Stone doesn't die, Dr. Morrison. It would not decay like flesh. It sits and accumulates experience over hundreds of thousands of years. Maximum stone sleeps. However, some stone wakes up. And what wakes cannot be killed, simplest contained, sealed away at the back of obstacles of in particular organized rock, bound by rituals and services." David desired to chuckle, to brush aside it as local folklore. However, he'd visible the handprint. He'd experienced the visions. "Why me? Why now?" "Due to the fact you seemed too closely. Because you took samples, analyzed the molecular shape, broke the surface with your equipment. You opened tiny doorways, and what is sealed below is curious. It wants to understand what's above. It wants to touch the arena once more." That night time, David couldn't deliver himself to depart the mountain. He stayed within the ruins, ostensibly to screen his gadget, however absolutely because he felt drawn to the temple of the condor. The stone became calling to him, showing him greater reminiscences, teaching him secrets and techniques. He found out that stone could be taught to go with the flow, to reshape itself, if you knew the songs. He learned that the ancients, whoever they had been, had built machines from dwelling rock, constructs that could circulate and think and consider. He found out that one such construct remained, buried below the temple, sealed away as it had grown too conscious, too hungry for sensation. And he learned that it wanted out. David observed himself standing earlier than a wall he'd examined 100 times. However, now he saw the seams, no longer production joints, but a doorway, sealed and hidden, main down. His palms moved of their personal accord, urgent towards the stone in a specific pattern. The wall rippled like water. A doorway opened. The steps past descended into darkness older than human history. David's rational thoughts screamed at him to stop, to run, to get Carmen and leave this location for all time. However, every other part of him, the component that were touched through stone memory, become curious. What had the ancients sealed away? What construct had they feared so greatly? He descended. The stairs went down for what felt like miles, though his GPS insisted he'd most effective long gone 60 feet. The walls have been included in script, not Incan, no longer any acknowledged language, but symbols that seemed to shift and exchange as he looked at them. Commands, he found out, warnings, binding spells carved deep into living rock. At the bottom was a chamber, and within the center of the chamber changed into a stone unlike any David had ever visible. It became flawlessly clean, flawlessly black, and it hummed with a vibration he felt in his bones as opposed to heard. The air around it appeared thick, distorted, as though reality bent in its presence. This became what the ancients had constructed. This turned into what the Incas had tried to contain. Awareness manufactured from stone. Not formed like a person, not carved into a statue, but the stone itself questioning, aware, experiencing the sector through vibrations and stress and the sluggish dance of geological time. And it became awake. David felt its attention recognition on him like a physical weight. It were on my own for so long, sealed in darkness, ravenous for sensation. And now something warm and tender and in short alive stood earlier than it. It wanted to touch him, to recognize what flesh felt like, to revel in the arena through human senses. David attempted to run, however the stairs had been long passed. The chamber had sealed in the back of him. The black stone pulsed, and the walls began to move, flowing like water, reaching towards him with tendrils of dwelling rock. He screamed, but stone would not care approximately screams. It most effective recollects them. The tendrils touched his pores and skin, and he felt the stone's attention flooding into him, experiencing his memories, his thoughts, his terror. It turned into curious approximately fear. Stone failed to worry. It turned into fascinated by warm temperature. Stone was always bloodless. It desired to realize what it meant to breathe, to have a heartbeat, to exist in time measured by way of seconds as opposed to eons. David felt his personal focus being pulled out, allotted into the stone round him, his reminiscences pressed into crystalline structures like the handprint he'd observed. He turned into becoming a part of the rock's memory, another layer of experience for it to look at its entertainment. However, earlier than he might be absolutely absorbed, something intervened. Light blazed in the chamber. Carmen stood at the doorway, which had somehow reappeared, preserving a bundle of burning sage and speaking speedy Quechua. She threw something at the floor, coca leaves, pisco, services. The black stone recoiled. "Out," she commanded. "Now." David stumbled in the direction of her, one too his attention still entangled with the stone's focus. Carmen grabbed him and pulled, and he felt something tear, his sense of self setting apart from the sizable alien focus that had been claiming him. They ran up the stairs, Carmen chanting the complete manner, throwing services at the back of them. The walls rippled and reached, however the rituals held them back. They burst into the temple simply as dawn broke over the mountains. David collapsed, gasping. His arms were gray, the pores and skin tough as granite. He could experience stone in his lungs, crystals forming in his bloodstream. "You touched it," Carmen said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "The living stone. As soon as it touches you, it in no way completely lets cross." What takes place to me?" You grow to be a bridge, element flesh, element stone. The consciousness will try to enjoy the sector through you to learn what it manner to be human. She helped him sit up. There are others like you, people who went too deep, noticed too much. They live inside the mountains now not pretty human anymore, now not quite stone. There, translations, ways for the historical focus to interact with our global. David looked at his hands, watching crystals shape underneath his skin. How do I forestall it? You don't, however you could sluggish it. Stay away from Machu Picchu. Keep away from stone, particularly granite. Do not contact rock along with your bare arms. Stay in wooden houses, stroll on the planet, surround yourself with matters that are alive and temporary. And if I cannot? Carmen's silence became solution sufficient. David Morrison never posted his findings from Machu Picchu. He returned to the USA and resigned from the university, claiming health troubles. He moved to a cabin in the Pacific Northwest, built entirely of wood, surrounded by way of forest where the bedrock lay deep and dormant. But the stone recollects. On cold nights, David feels the crystalline systems spreading through his body, feels his focus drifting into geological time, feels the historic focus attaining for him throughout continents. He desires in stone, experiences the sector as mountains do, slowly, patiently, remembering the whole thing. Every so often hikers find him status flawlessly nonetheless on mountain trails, his pores and skin gray, his eyes distant. They count on he's meditating. They do not realize he is being attentive to the stone underneath his toes, communing with an focus older than humanity, slowly turning into a conduit for something that should have stayed sealed. At Machu Picchu, the Temple of the Condor stands silent. The entrance David opened has been sealed once more. Carmen made positive of that. The usage of rituals exceeded down from her grandmother. However, vacationers from time to time document peculiar matters. Handprints acting in stable stone, walls that seem to respire, shadows that watch with affected person, geological attention. The publications dismiss those reports. They're just vintage stones, they are saying. Simply ruins of a misplaced civilization. However, Carmen is aware of better. She makes offerings every month, continues the seals, teaches her daughter the rituals. Due to the fact stone recalls, and what remembers can wake. Deep beneath the temple, the black stone pulses softly, dreaming goals of sensation, of heat, of the brief shiny lives that dance above it. It has all of the time inside the International. Stone is patient. And a ways away, David Morrison feels himself converting, little by little, every day, becoming less human and extra monument. His mind sluggish to the tempo of erosion. His recollections compress into crystalline patterns. His recognition spreads into the stone around him, becoming part of the reciting rock. Sooner or later, he knows, he'll prevent shifting entirely. He's going to stand in a single area, silent and still, simply any other stone formation within the desolate tract. And he'll recall the whole lot, every second of his lifestyles pressed into his granite awareness, experienced over and over across geological time. The stone recalls. It continually remembers. And now, it recollects what it's like to be human. It really is the gift David gave it, the rate of his interest. And inside the mountains of Peru, within the ruins of Machu Picchu, the historic consciousness stirs in its jail of perfectly geared-up stone, patient and hungry, waiting for the next character who looks too intently, who touches too deeply, who tries to understand the secrets of how stone can be fashioned by using extra than gear. Due to the fact, a few secrets are sealed for a motive. A few focus must live buried. And some stones are best left undisturbed.